Welcome back to episode 2 of this mini series on job hunting and applied biology. If you have watched episode 1, which I have linked below and would recommend starting with, you already know that I have just discussed about the job market being tough. And especially for scientists like microbiologists or chemists or molecular biologists, bioinformaticians, manufacturing scientists, it's especially frustrating because many of us aren't lacking experience. We do have experience from our thesis work in master's or PhD, or we have some level of experience from our bachelor's work. But what I realized is we are just not being seen. And that's what this episode is really about. The very first real step I focused on in my own job search, which was just few months ago, was LinkedIn. Now, most people will tell you to optimize your LinkedIn or add keywords, but that advice assumes everyone is evaluated the same way as a person in tech or a person in sales or marketing. But I believe that scientists aren't. Our credibility works differently, our signal works differently. LinkedIn isn't a resume, it's basically a filtering system. Within seconds, the algorithm and the human on the other side, which could be a recruiter or a hiring manager, are asking one question: can I place this person? If your profile is unclear, if you don't look flexible, you get filtered out. So, in this episode, I am not going to share the hacks or generic LinkedIn advice. I'll be breaking down how this filtering actually works for scientific profiles and how I redesigned my LinkedIn intentionally as a microbiologist to stay open in the market without becoming invisible. If you ever felt overqualified, underreached, or just stuck, then this episode is for you. Let's get into it. So, in this episode, I'll walk through 3 layers. First, profile optimization. Second, content and visibility. And third, job search and networking mechanics. In profile optimization, I will show how I redesigned my own LinkedIn profile to send a clear, strong signal as a microbiologist or a bioinformatician. Secondly, in content and visibility, I will show how I used posting and activity to reinforce that signal instead of confusing it. And finally, in networking and job search, how I approached conversation and opportunities once the foundation was in place. Now, this episode I have divided into 3 parts: part A, part B, and part C. In part A, I'll entirely focus on profile optimization with concrete examples which probably you can use while redesigning your own profile, not just the theory. So let's get started with profile optimization. So in profile optimization is not just to make your profile look better, but to make sure it reaches the right recruiters or the hiring managers. I believe from my experience that LinkedIn works as 2 systems at once. One as a search engine, and secondly as a trust screen. First, you need to appear in searches, and then you need to reduce uncertainty, which I'll talk about later. Now, the first thing that I changed was my headline, because this is one of the highest weight fields on LinkedIn. A headline that only states your job title tells them what you are, but not where you fit. So I rewrote my headline to encode 3 signals: the domain I operate in, the problem space I work on, and the applied context, which is basically why it matters outside the lab. Now, this improves search relevance and pattern recognition at the same time. Think of your headline as a classifier and not just a label. So I'll give you some examples to show what exactly I did with my headline, which I'll show in the next slide. So to make this concrete as to how the headline should appear, let me show you a few examples across different biology roles. Now, these are not the templates to copy, they're examples of structure. All of them follow the same logic. First is the domain, then the problem space, and the applied context. Different roles, same logic. The goal here isn't to sound impressive. The goal is to make it immediately obvious in one glance whether your experience belongs in that recruiter's search results. For example, here is an industrial microbiology headline. Now, as you can see, the first part is the domain, that is industrial microbiologist. The middle section defines the problem space, which in this case is biofilms, MICs, that is microbially influenced corrosion, and sequencing. And the last part, which is this one, explains the applied context, how that work informs field scale decisions. Similarly, I have an example for bioprocessing scientist. Again, the domain, the problem space, and finally the applied context. Now let's look at the other headline for bioinformatics scientist. Again, the structure stays the same, which is the domain first, then the type of data and analysis involved. In this case, it is omics, statistical modeling, and pipelines. Let's say you are into eukaryotic bioinformatician, where you deal with single cell RNA sequencing. You can mention it here. Or let's say you are dealing with other type of sequencing techniques like 16S or whole genome sequencing or metagenomic sequencing. That is something that you can write here. And finally, this one is what that work actually enables in practice, right? So again, the applied context. And similarly, you have another example for clinical scientist, right? So here, these examples are most useful when you're repositioning or exploring new roles or trying to make your profile legible to a broader set of recruiters. And just to be clear, if you're not actively job hunting, a simple job title headline is perfectly fine. Now, in my own case, I work across microbiology and bioinformatics. So instead of choosing one and hiding the other, my headline made that intersection explicit. Again, the domain, problem space, and applied context in a single line. This is an example of how my headline looked when I was actively job searching. And it wasn't static. I adjusted it over time based on the signals I was getting, the kind of roles I was seeing, the recruiters reaching out, and the conversations I was having. That's the point. Your headline isn't permanent. It's a positioning tool. Right next to the headline is another small but important signal, the profile photo. This is not about appearance, it's about the signal clarity. LinkedIn is a people-first platform, and a clear professional photo increases the likelihood that someone actually pauses to read your profile. For scientists, this doesn't mean heavy editing or corporate branding. It means good lighting, a neutral background, a clear view of your face, and a photo that matches how you show up professionally. The goal isn't perfection, the goal is to build trust. So once the headline and photo are doing their job, the next thing a hiring manager or the recruiters might read if they are interested is the About section of LinkedIn. I don't treat the About section as a biography. I treat it as a translational layer. Now, your resume lists what you have done. Your About section explains how to interpret it. So in your About section, if anyone is reading, should already understand who you are, what problems you work on, and whether your experience fits their environment. I structure my About section into 4 parts so that most recruiters can understand me in under few seconds. Now, the first part that I focus on is identity and domain, who I am and where I operate. Again, this isn't my life story, it's my professional identity in one breath. You'll notice when I show the screenshot of my About section that I haven't listed all the tools and techniques here. I first established the domain. So if someone reads only this paragraph, they already know whether to keep reading or I am not fit for that job. The second part is problem space and impact. This answers a different question. What kind of problems do I work on and why do they matter? The goal here isn't detail, but it's the impact. I want it to be clear that my work connects biology to real world decisions, not just lab outputs. The third part is what I actually work on. And this section is meant to be scanned, not read line by line. This is where keywords live, but with context. I don't list everything I have done. I list what reinforces my direction, especially in the headline section. And the final part is proof, scale, and trust. This answers a question which recruiters or hiring manager almost always have but rarely ask directly. Can I trust this person at scale? That's where I anchor my work in outcomes like fundings, programs, grant writing, pilot to industrial scale, and real constraints. It shows that this work happened in real system with real consequences and what your contribution has been, right? And again, just like what I mentioned in the headline, this section wasn't static for me. I adjusted it over time based on the roles I was exploring and the signals I was getting from the market. So the structure stayed the same, but the emphasis shifted, which I'll show you in the next slide, how I sectioned my about section. Now, this is a screenshot of my about section from LinkedIn from when I was actively job searching. I'm not going to read it line by line. I just want to show you how the structure maps to the 4 parts that I discussed. Now, at the top, the first paragraph is identity and domain. In one breath, it tells you who I am, where I operate, and the kind of environments I work in, without listing tools or technique. Now, the second paragraph here focuses on problem space and impact. This is where I make it clear what kind of problems I work on and why they matter outside the lab. Then there is this third section, which is a scannable section that shows what I actually work on. This isn't meant to be read carefully line by line. It's there so recruiters or hiring managers can quickly spot relevant keywords with enough context to understand direction. And finally, there is this fourth section of career highlights, which anchor everything in proof, scale, and trust. This is where outcomes, fundings, scale, and real-world constraints shows up. So it's clear this work happened in real system and how I contributed to solve some of the problems. The exact wording again changed over time, but this structure stayed the same. That's what makes the profile easier to interpret. So after scanning through your About section on LinkedIn, I believe recruiters and hiring managers usually go next to the Experience section. And this is another part where a lot of scientists, including myself, often get it wrong at first. Most experience sections are written as task list. For example, performed this, executed that, used these techniques. That's exactly how mine looked for a very long time. The problem is, industry hiring isn't task-based, it's risk-based. So based on my experience, I believe that recruiters who read your experiences, they're subconsciously looking for 3 things. First, the environment you worked in. Second, the scale you operated at. And the third thing is the downstream impact of that work. When I was actively job searching, I started rewriting my experience with those 3 signals in mind. Not by removing tasks, but by adding context. Let me give you a few examples here. Let's say if I say like perform qPCR, sequencing, and microbial analysis. Rather than that, I reframed it to show the environment, scale, and the impact of my work. So I could write something like worked in an industrial environment applying molecular and sequencing based microbial analysis to support pilot scale validation and operational risk assessment. That is one example. Let's see, there is another example I can provide. For example, let's say conducted fermentation experiments. Now, instead of writing this, where I conducted fermentation experiment and bacteria, blah blah, I could rather write like led bench to pilot fermentation work in a manufacturing setting, contributing to scale up decision and process optimization. So they know that what kind of scale you were working in, what kind of environment you were working in, and what was the impact of your work or how your work contributed for process optimization, right? So the underlying work here didn't change. What changed was how clearly a recruiter or a hiring manager could see where that work fits in. And this will look different for different people. Let's say someone from academia might want to emphasize research environments and experimental complexity. Someone from manufacturing might highlight regulated systems and compliances. Someone from startup might want to focus on speed, ambiguity, and scale. The goal at the end of the day is to structure your experience around environment, scale, and downstream impact, so that a hiring manager or recruiter can quickly assess whether you have already operated in the similar context. When you do that, you're no longer just listing tasks, you are reducing hiring uncertainty. So after the experience, recruiters usually glance at skills, recommendations, certificates, publication, and awards. Now, these sections are small, but they carry a surprising amount of signal. I treated skills as reinforcement, not accumulation. What it means is controlled repetition. The same core skills that showed up in my headline, my about section, my experience description, and then again it was in my skill set. Not everything that I have worked on, but only those things I listed which supports the direction. Now, what happens is when the same skills appear consistently across your profile, they start to feel real, and obviously those are real skills, but just to make it more impactful. They don't look like keywords you added once you have done those techniques, right? Like those techniques you perform more on regular basis, you are expert in those techniques, right? So the skill set is basically an reinforcement and not the accumulation of all the skills that you have done. The next part is recommendation, which I believe matters, especially for scientists, because much of our impact isn't public. A recommendation is a third-party trust signal. So it tells anyone who's visiting your profile that you have worked in real systems, how your interactions have been with your colleagues, with your mentors, with your vendors, etc. So I would suggest asking for a recommendation from people you have actually worked with, be it your colleagues, your collaborators, your managers, your mentors, your mentees, your vendors who have seen you operate day to day, right? And what matters isn't seniority, it's proximity to your work. So that is where recommendation plays a very important role. The next part is certificates. Again, certificates are different and they don't replace experience, and they are not meant to replace experience, right? What they show is trajectory, where you have intentionally where you are intentionally building next. Let me give you an example. My skill set, along with bioinformatics and microbiology, I have also worked in AI and ML and have taken several boot camps for that. So that is the direction where I am trying to integrate biology with these kind of skill set, and those are my certificates. Now, what I have learned over the period of time is, instead of just sharing the certificates that I have earned, what I usually do is, or what I believe is more effective, is to showcase a project or an assignment using those skills. Let's say if I am talking about convolutional neural network and I have earned this particular skill set through a certificate, but rather than just showing that, I might do a side project on convolutional neural network and share that on LinkedIn. Just an example, right? So that shows applied skill and not just completion. And I'll talk more about how to do when we get more into the next part of the video, which is about posting and viewing, which I'll talk later. The next part, the next small section on LinkedIn is about publication and awards. Again, play a similar role. They don't need to be exhaustive. They are here to anchor credibility, your rigor, your depth, your recognition when they align with where you are headed to, right? So those are few of the other sections, and they are very important. I believe they have important signals to play, and these are some of the ideas that I had used to redesign again my LinkedIn for these sections. Now, before wrapping up our profile optimization section, I wanted to highlight one critical mistake that usually scientists or people from scientific background we try to achieve, but it is not always right. We are trained to be complete, like complete all the areas, put in all the skills, put in all the techniques, even if you have performed it once. But over the period, I have learned that LinkedIn does not reward completeness. Completeness rather weakens signal. Relevance strengthens it, right? Relevance strengthens it. So listing every technique, every method, and every tool you have ever used doesn't make your profile stronger. It makes it harder to interpret. Your goal is to not document everything you have done. Your goal is to make your direction obvious, the area that you want to be in, the environment or the scope of work that you are confident about. That is what you want to make it obvious with your LinkedIn. When your experience, your skills, and your proof all points in the same direction, your profile becomes much easier to trust. Once this foundation was in place, posting and job searching started working very differently for me, and that is the reason I'm sharing my experience. Now, in part B, I'll show how I use posting and visibility to reinforce this positioning and how I avoid applying blindly for jobs. Now, again, if this all was helpful, if all this sections and how I try to redesign my LinkedIn was helpful, please give it a shot. Try it with your own LinkedIn. And if you like this video, give a thumbs up so that more scientists can find it. And good luck with your job search, and stay tuned for part B.